Rain has a way of washing the world clean, but staring out the window of the Blackwood Estate Library, I knew that no amount of water could scrub away the rot festering inside this house. I am Arthur Blackwood. For 40 years, I sat on a bench elevated above the courtroom floor, wearing a black robe that symbolized judgment, order, and truth. I held the gavel that decided the fate of murderers, thieves, and liars. I was the law. But now, at 79 years old, I am nothing more than a problem to be solved, a line item in a ledger, a prisoner confined to a wheelchair in the very home I purchased with my first year's salary on the bench. 3 months ago, I fell down the main staircase. That is the official story. That is what the doctors were told. A tragic accident, a dizzy spell, a sign of decline. But I remember the sensation of a hand on my back, a firm, deliberate shove, just before the world tilted and I tumbled into darkness. It was Todd, my son-in-law. Since that day, my daughter Rachel and Todd have moved in to care for me. Their version of care is a regimen of isolation and sedation. They feed me pills that make my thoughts swim in molasses. They have built a wall of silence around me, brick by brick, while I sit here, drooling on myself, trapped in a chemical fog. But today, the fog is gone. For the last 3 days, I have been pretending to swallow the blue pills. I hide them under my tongue until they leave the room, then spit them into the potted fern by the window. The clarity has returned slowly, painfully, like feeling returning to a frostbitten limb. It is Thursday afternoon. The house is quiet. Rachel is at her expensive gym, working on a body she thinks will keep her young forever. Todd is in my study, managing the estate, which mostly involves drinking my 30-year-old scotch and looking at real estate listings on his phone. I wheeled myself to the heavy mahogany desk in the corner of the library. It was an effort that made my arms tremble, but desperation is a powerful fuel. I was looking for a photograph of my late wife, Martha. I needed to see her face. I needed to remember a time when this house was filled with love, not poison. I opened the bottom drawer, expecting to find the photo album. Instead, I found a manila folder marked in red ink. Urgent, liquidation. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it. The first document was a contract of sale for the Blackwood Estate. My estate. My home. It was dated 2 weeks ago. The buyer was a development firm known for tearing down historic homes to build luxury condos. The price was listed, a sum that made my eyes water, though it was far below market value. A quick sale, a fire sale. And there, at the bottom of the page, was a signature. Arthur J. Blackwood. I stared at the shaky blue ink. It looked like my signature. It had the same loop on the A, the same sharp cross on the T. But I didn't sign this. I haven't held a pen in months. My hands shake too much from the withdrawal of the medication I'm supposed to be taking. It was a forgery. A meticulous, practiced forgery. I flipped through the rest of the folder. Bank transfer authorizations, stock liquidation orders, a power of attorney document granting Todd Henderson full control over my finances, medical decisions, and assets. I had never seen this document. I had never authorized it. The realization hit me with the force of a gavel strike. They aren't just waiting for me to die. They are accelerating the process. They are stripping the carcass before the heart has stopped beating. They have sold my home out from under me while I am still sitting in it. I looked at the date on the power of attorney. It was signed 3 days before my fall. The fall wasn't an accident. It was the first step in the liquidation plan. They needed me incapacitated.
They needed me confused. They needed me out of the way so they could spend the money I spent a lifetime earning. I sat there in the silence of the library, holding the evidence of my own erasure, and I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the drafty window. I spent my life judging strangers. I looked into the eyes of criminals and discerned their guilt. But I failed to judge the monster sleeping down the hall. I failed to see the greed in my own daughter's eyes, the ambition in her husband's smile. If you are listening to this, if you have handed over control of your life to your children because you think blood guarantees loyalty, or if you assume that the people who share your last name will protect your interests, stop. Check the papers. Check the accounts. Look at the signatures. Don't make the mistake of thinking you are safe just because you are loved. Love is an emotion. Greed is a biological imperative.
Subscribe to this channel. Listen to my story, because I am about to show you how a retired judge passes sentence on his own flesh and blood when the law fails him. I heard the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway. A car door slammed. Todd was back. Panic spiked in my chest, sharp and hot. I couldn't let them know I knew, not yet. If I confronted them now, I was a confused old man in a wheelchair against two healthy, desperate predators. They would see the folder. They would realize the medication wasn't working. They would increase the dosage. They would silence me permanently. An accidental overdose, a tragic second fall. I shoved the papers back into the folder. I closed the drawer. I wheeled myself back to the window, my hands flying over the rubber rims. I arranged my blanket over my legs. I let my jaw slacken. I stared blankly at the rain. The library door opened. Todd's voice was slick like oil. He walked into my line of sight. He was wearing one of my old cashmere sweaters stretched tight over his paunch. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, my scotch. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on a raindrop tracing a path down the glass. I let a small line of drool escape the corner of my mouth. "Rain," I mumbled, slurring my words deliberately. Todd chuckled. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "Yeah, she sure did, old man." He took a sip of the scotch. "You just sit there and watch the rain, Arthur. Don't worry about a thing. Rachel and I are taking care of everything. The house? It's a lot of work." He patted my shoulder. His hand felt heavy, proprietary. He wasn't comforting me. He was checking the ripeness of the fruit before he plucked it. "Handling it," I repeated, my voice vacant. "That's right," he said. He walked out, closing the door behind him. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. I waited until I heard the television turn on in the living room. Then I wiped the drool from my chin. My eyes snapped into focus. My mind, once clouded by their poison, was now working with the precision of a diamond cutter. I needed a plan. I needed a witness. I needed a court. But I was trapped in this house. The phone lines were monitored. My cell phone had gone missing months ago. I reached into the cushion of my wheelchair. My fingers brushed against hard plastic. The burner phone. Samuel, my old court clerk, had smuggled it inside a laundry basket last week when he delivered my clean shirts. Samuel was 80, deaf in one ear, and moved slower than a glacier, but he was loyal as a hound. He had suspected something was wrong when Rachel stopped letting him visit. I pulled the phone out. I kept it hidden under the blanket. I dialed the number I had memorized 30 years ago. It rang twice. A gruff voice answered. "Samuel," I whispered into the dark, my voice low and urgent. "It's Arthur." Samuel's voice cracked. "Are you okay?" "They tried," I said, "and they are going to try again. But I have the evidence, Samuel. I saw the papers, the sale contract, the forgery." "Call Detective Miller," I said. "Tell him I'm ready. Tell him the judge is calling in the favor from the '98 racketeering case.
Tell him I have proof of elder abuse, wire fraud, and grand larceny. I paused, looking at the rain. Tell him I'm hosting a dinner party tomorrow night. Yes, I said. I hung up. I hid the phone back in the cushion. The plan was set. It was dangerous. It required me to walk into the lion's den with a smile on my face. But I had spent my life studying the behavior of the guilty. I knew how greed worked. Greed made people blind. Greed made people arrogant. The next morning, I summoned them. I waited until they were both in the kitchen, drinking coffee and ignoring me. I wheeled myself in. I let my hands shake violently. I coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Rachel grimace. "Rachel," I wheezed. They looked at me with annoyance. Rachel asked, checking her nails. I feel it," I said, "the fading." Todd looked up, interested. "The end," I whispered. I think I'm close, and I want to settle things." I looked at them with wide, pleading eyes. "I want to sign the papers," I said. "The estate, the new will. I want to give it all to you, now." Their eyes lit up. The transformation was instantaneous and disgusting. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a hungry, predatory eagerness. They looked at each other. They thought they had won. They thought the drugs had finally broken me completely. They thought I was handing them the keys to the kingdom voluntarily, saving them the trouble of a competency hearing. "Oh, Daddy," Rachel cooed, rushing over to kneel beside my chair. She took my hand. "Are you sure?" "No," I said, squeezing her hand with feigned weakness. "Tomorrow. Let's do it tomorrow night. A family dinner. Call the lawyer. Call the notary. I want to celebrate." "A dinner," Todd said, grinning.
"That sounds perfect, Arthur." "Make it beautiful, Rachel," I said. "I will," she promised, her voice thick with fake emotion. She stood up and went to the counter to call the caterer. Todd pulled out his phone to text the lawyer, Mr. Sterling, a man I had known for 20 years, a man who was already in on the trap thanks to Samuel. I sat there, watching them plan their victory lap. I wiped Rachel's kiss off my forehead with a trembling hand. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. Tomorrow night, Detective Miller would be sitting in the next room, listening to every word. I wasn't planning a dinner. I was planning an arraignment. And the only thing being served would be justice, cold and hard. A courtroom is usually a cold, sterile place of mahogany and marble, designed to strip away emotion and leave only the raw facts of the law. But tonight, my courtroom was a dining table set with Martha's finest bone china, lit by the flickering warmth of beeswax candles that smelled of honey and impending doom. I sat at the head of the table, the place of honor for the corpse they thought they were burying. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the scent of roast beef, garlic, and the cloying, expensive perfume my daughter Rachel had sprayed on to mask the stench of her own betrayal. I took a sip of water, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. It was the only sound in the room besides the aggressive ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock Todd had probably already appraised and sold to a collector in the city. I looked at them, my jury of executioners. Rachel sat to my right. She was dressed in black, a premature widow's weed for a father who was still breathing. She was playing the role of the devoted, exhausted caregiver to perfection, her hand occasionally fluttering to her chest as if her heart were breaking. But her eyes told a different story. They were bright, hard, and fixed on the leather portfolio sitting in front of Mr. Sterling. She wasn't grieving. She was calculating. To my left sat Todd. He was wearing a navy suit that was a size too small for his expanding waistline, and around his neck was a silk tie with a pattern of small sailboats. I recognized it instantly. It was my tie.
It was a gift from Martha for our 30th anniversary. Seeing it knotted around the throat of the man who had pushed me down the stairs made my bile rise, acidic and hot. He was drinking my vintage Cabernet as if it were water, his leg bouncing under the table with a nervous, frantic energy. He checked his watch every 30 seconds. He had somewhere to be. He had money to spend. At the far end of the table sat Mr. Sterling, my attorney of 20 years, looking solemn and impenetrable. Next to him was a notary public, a young woman named Sarah, who looked terrified to be in the room, sensing the violence vibrating in the air like a plucked string. "The roast is delicious, Rachel," I said. My voice was strong, devoid of the tremor I had feigned for months. It cut through the silence like a gavel strike. Rachel jumped, startled by the clarity of my tone. She recovered quickly, forcing a sad, indulgent smile. "I'm glad you're eating, Daddy. You need your strength." "The doctor says a lot of things," I replied, cutting a piece of meat with precise surgical movements. "But tonight I feel remarkably lucid." Todd asked, his mouth full. "It's just dinner, Arthur. Let's get to the paperwork so you can get back to bed." He didn't mean tired. He meant inconvenient. "Let's begin," I said, ignoring him and locking eyes with Sterling. "I don't want to waste anyone's time." Sterling nodded. He stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket. He didn't look at Rachel or Todd. He opened the leather folder, the sound of the zipper loud in the hushed room. He pulled out a document printed on heavy bonded paper. Todd smirked. He took another large swallow of wine, leaning back in his chair with the arrogance of a man who believes he has already won the lottery. I saw him glance at Rachel and wink. It was a small, grotesque gesture of conspiracy. "Almost there," the wink said, "almost rich." "Hereby revoke all prior wills and testaments," Sterling continued. Sterling paused. He looked over the top of his reading glasses at Rachel. To my daughter, Rachel Elizabeth Henderson," he read. Rachel leaned forward, her breath hitching. Her hands gripped the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles white. She was ready for the millions. She was ready for the portfolio, the bonds, the liquid assets. She needed to pay off the debts she thought I didn't know about. The silence stretched. Rachel blinked. She waited for the rest of the sentence. "That is the entirety of the bequest," Sterling said flatly. Rachel gasped, her voice rising an octave. "I believe it contains your mother's costume jewelry," I said softly. "The paste diamonds she used to wear for travel. And perhaps a few photographs of you as a child. Before you," Rachel whispered, horror dawning on her face. "Daddy, the diamonds?" "Sold," I lied. "Wait a minute," Todd interrupted, slamming his wineglass down so hard red liquid sloshed onto the white tablecloth. "Hold on. This is a joke, right? What about the house? What about the stock portfolio?" "I'm getting to that," Sterling said, his voice turning icy. He looked at Todd. He looked at the tie around Todd's neck. "To my son-in-law, Todd Michael Henderson," Sterling read. Todd straightened up, fixing his collar. He assumed the assets had been diverted to him to bypass estate taxes on Rachel's side. He looked smug. Todd froze. His smile faltered, then vanished. "Diamonds," he repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Which represents the exact value of the loyalty, care, and respect he has shown me in my final years," Sterling finished, closing the folder with a sharp snap. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that happens after a car crash, before the screaming starts. Todd's face turned a violent, mottled shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged against my silk tie. He looked from Sterling to me, his eyes bulging with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "Todd," demanded, his voice shaking. He stood up, knocking his chair backward. It fell with a crash, but he didn't notice. $1? We've been wiping your ass for 6 months, old man. We moved into this drafty museum to take care of you. You sacrificed nothing, I said, my voice calm, contrasting his hysteria. You moved in to save rent because you lost your job, Todd. Todd screamed, pointing a finger at me. This will is garbage. It doesn't matter what you wrote on that paper. We control the assets. Rachel hissed, grabbing his arm, her eyes darting to the notary who was now pressing herself back against her chair, terrified. Todd shouted, shaking her off. I'm not sitting down. He can't do this. The house is already in escrow. We signed the papers last week. The closing is on Monday. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the cold, wolfish smile of a prosecutor who has just goaded the defendant into confessing on the stand. Thank you, Todd, I said softly. Todd stopped. He looked at me, confusion warring with his anger. What record? Who cares? You're senile. You're incompetent. This will won't hold up in probate court for 5 minutes.
We have medical records, Arthur. We have months of documentation from Dr. Actually, I said, reaching down to the wheels of my chair and backing myself away from the table, creating distance. You are half right. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, the jacket I hadn't worn in a year, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. But they aren't from Dr. Evans, I said. They are from an independent lab in the city. My blood work came back this morning, Todd. Rachel went still. She looked at the paper in my hand as if it were a loaded gun. Dad, I'm talking about the toxicology report, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I'm talking about the high levels of unauthorized antipsychotics and sedatives found in my bloodstream. Drugs that were never prescribed to me. Drugs that cause confusion, muscle weakness, and compliance. That's a lie, Todd stammered, but his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit. You're confused. I haven't taken a pill in 4 days, I said. I spit them out. That's why I'm awake, Todd. I threw the paper onto the table. It landed next to the spilled wine. And as for the power of attorney, I continued, enjoying the dawn of absolute terror breaking over their faces, Mr. Sterling filed a revocation with the county clerk 10 days ago. It was notarized, filed, and stamped. The document you used to sell my house last week, it was void. It was worthless. And using a void document to transfer real estate isn't just a mistake, Rachel. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto my daughter's. It's a felony. It's called wire fraud. It's called grand larceny. Todd screamed. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked dangerous. He lunged toward the end of the table, his hands reaching for me. You old cripple out. I didn't flinch. I didn't recoil. I sat in my wheelchair, the judge in his chair, and I looked past him toward the heavy oak double doors of the library adjacent to the dining room. Gal, I called out, my voice ringing clear. The library doors burst open with a crash that shook the walls. It wasn't just a patrolman. It was Detective Miller, a man I had sworn in when he was a rookie 20 years ago, now a man of iron and badge. Behind him were 3 uniformed officers, their hands resting on their holsters. They had been sitting in the library for an hour, listening to the entire dinner via the bug I had planted in the floral centerpiece, a simple baby monitor hidden in the hydrangeas. Todd stopped mid-lunge. He froze, 1 foot off the ground looking at the police, then back at me. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a wax figure melting in the heat. Sit down, Detective Miller barked. Todd collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. Todd Henderson, Detective Miller said, stepping into the light of the chandelier. An officer moved forward, pulling Todd's arms behind his back. The clink of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had heard in months. Rachel started to sob. It was a jagged, ugly sound. She threw herself onto her knees, crawling toward me. She begged, grabbing the wheel of my chair. I didn't know about the drugs. He made me do it. He said we needed the money for the business. He said you wouldn't mind. I looked down at my daughter. I looked at the tears streaking her expensive makeup. I looked at the hands that had fed me poison. "You watched him push me," I said. My voice broke. For the first time all night, the mask of the judge slipped and the father peeked through. The pain was unbearable, a physical weight in my chest. "I saw you, Rachel, that day on the stairs. I saw you at the top of the landing. You watched him put his hand on my back. You watched me fall. And you didn't scream. You didn't run to help." I was scared," she whispered. "You weren't scared," I said softly. I pulled my hand away from her grasp. I looked at Detective Miller and nodded. "She's a co-conspirator, Detective," I said. She screamed as the second officer pulled her to her feet. "Officers, take them," I said, turning my wheelchair away so I wouldn't have to watch them drag my own blood out of my house. The scene was chaotic. Todd fought the handcuffs, screaming obscenities, and was slammed against the wall, my vintage wallpaper tearing under the impact. Rachel was led away weeping, begging for a second chance she had forfeited months ago. The notary was shaking, packing her bag with fumble-fingered haste. And then, silence. The front door slammed shut. The sirens wailed outside, fading into the distance like the cries of ghosts. When the room was finally quiet, only Sterling and I remained. The food was cold on the plates. The wine was breathing in the decanter. Sterling sat down in the chair next to me. He poured himself a glass of wine. He looked tired. "It's done, Arthur," Sterling said gently. "Yes," I said. I looked at the empty chairs. I looked at the indentation in the carpet where Rachel had knelt. "The house sale is voided," Sterling said. "The assets are frozen. We have the toxicology report." "I have my house back," I said, looking around the room at the shadows stretching across the floor. I looked at the window, where the rain was still falling, washing the world clean, relentless and indifferent to the tragedy that had just occurred. "But I have lost my family," I whispered. "You saved your dignity," Sterling said, raising his glass, "and you served justice." I picked up the glass of wine Todd had poured for himself but never tasted. I held it up to the light. It was dark, rich, and blood red. "To justice," I said. I drank. It tasted bitter, metallic on my tongue, but it went down smooth. I was alone in a cavernous house. I was crippled. I was childless. But I was safe. And as I sat in the silence of my reclaimed home, listening to the rain, I knew that the gavel had finally dropped. The verdict was in, and I was the only one left standing.